Salutations, everyone! Welcome back to Total Warhammer 3. I'm Lord Forwind, and today we have a guide on how to play the Changeling. So this guide is going to be divided into several sections, and I will chapter and tag them below so you can simply jump to which ones you wish to see. And if you enjoyed this guide, please do like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you all in another video. Let's jump right into it. So the Changeling faction, the Deceivers, is probably the most unique faction currently in Total Warhammer 3. It's kind of a weird combination between the Kai the Wanderer and the Skaven, if you've played either of those. You cannot occupy territory. Instead, when you take a city, you establish a trickster cult, or you can raise the city. You can also sack it as well. But by and large, you expand your territory through cults, where you make money, you manipulate lands, and raise troops from. And this leads to a very unique playstyle in the sense that you may only have like one army or so on the map, but you may control and be manipulating vast quantities of the map. The other thing to note is you can replenish recruit in foreign territory. This is needed because you are, in fact, always in foreign territory because you will never own any territory of your own. What this does mean, though, a cool little trick, is if you're sieging a settlement, unless you're suffering attrition, you will in fact be replenishing, which is very important to note considering the Changeling has some replenishment issues. Now, the last one up here, and I've held up this faction summary for a reason, is armies are hidden in regions with trickster cults. If you own a region with the trickster cult, first off, it'll have a nice little like blue mist and this red bird over the settlement, blue bird over the settlement icon. If you move your army in there, a little icon will appear above your army saying your army is invisible. Now, it's invisible in some ways and not invisible in others, and I think they have some bugs at the moment of this recording. But basically, if you own a trickster cult, unless you're actively attacking the enemy or you're standing right next to an army or their city, the enemies will not be able to find and attack your armies. This is very important for the Changeling because for a good chunk of the game, you'll probably just have one army. Later on, you'll have multiple armies, but by and large, you don't want to fight every single battle you can unless you're going for an offensive strategy. The Changeling can divide their gameplay style between a very peaceful, symbiotic cult and a very parasitic, damaging cult. So, let's explain how you establish cults, mainly. The easiest way to establish a cult is to attack and take a settlement. Once you're done, you can establish a symbiotic trickster cult, which will cause the province, by and large, to be better for the owner, but it will make them a lot harder to detect your cult. Or you can create a parasitic one, where you'll make more money and get more resources, but it's a lot easier, actually, for them to detect your cult there, and if they detect it, they will destroy it. And you can also raise the settlement. I don't recommend raising the settlement pretty much ever. You're almost always better with a cult. The biggest reason for this is your cults are not destroyed when someone else raises a settlement. So we have just created this, and it says we've completed a scheme. That's another mechanic, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but this is very good for us. So we have created all these pop-ups. So now in Norden here, we have a parasitic cult. So the building tree for cults is quite interesting. You've got purple, which is parasitic, and blue, which is symbiotic, as well as your basic military stuff. So if we hover over this, we can build our basic military, where we get access to the standard Zeech units, horrors, and all the like. You can build your infantry line, where you will get top line infantry. The cool thing about, and cavalry, the cool thing about this is any settlement can build to this level. Major settlements don't have any extra slots for this, so at most you'll ever have 4 in a settlement. There's very little difference between owning a major settlement and a minor settlement in terms of having a cult there for this faction. You can get top of the line units very easily, and in fact, when I played my 2 campaigns as these guys, I spent a lot of my time using global recruitment, so I didn't really have to build any more than 1 or 2 of these buildings anywhere on the map. Next one is your standard advanced military building. The key point here is the Cult of Change will unlock the technology Glean Magic. That's really the only big difference there. Now, into terms of symbiotic. So that was obviously the military. Now we're into the symbiotic stuff. So the symbiotic cults and cults in general follow a discoverability. If you've played the Skaven, you know how their undercities get detected. It's basically the same thing for trickster cults. However, the tricksters have more ways to prevent discovery. So for most of your buildings here, all but your cult spreading building and this race army building, you will actually lower discovery when you build it and you upgrade it. So this first one here will give you cult supplies, which is what you need to build cult buildings. The reality is, between grimoires and cult supplies, I never had problems running out of them, as long as you remember to build this in basically every settlement. However, the keynote here is it will provide control for the owner of the settlement. So if you want the owner of that settlement to have a very stable province and to be overall a stronger faction, you build one of these infrastructure buildings here. And yes, you loot them for some resources. Your cult is very hard to discover and they're more stable. Now, on the flip side, there's a symbiotic building here, which does basically the same thing, except it lowers control and it increases your discoverability. Maxed out, that's negative 12 control to a province. You stick 2 or 3 of these in a settlement region, you're going to cause revolt over and over, to the point that, by and large, in my experience, rebels took over or invading factions moved in. And then, of course, the invading factions had rebels of their own. So if you want to destabilize an area, that is the building you want to build. The parasitic infrastructure in terms of looting stuff. And you will notice that you will loot 3 cult supplies and 4 grimoires per turn, as well as spread corruption versus the 2 and 8. So if you want grimoires, you want to be symbiotic. If you want cult supplies, you want to be more parasitic. The reality is there's very little reason for you to be symbiotic in the late game. You can convert, you can convert between settlements with ease. It does take several turns, but the cool part is I can start with a parasitic one and then I can swap to symbiotic and back and forth. It does take turns to change though. So that is your stability or instability one. The next one here is your income building. If you go symbiotic, you will get income based off the region owner's income, as well as they will get a boost to income. So if you want to strengthen a faction, build this. In my opinion, probably one of the best provinces in the game to stick in is Castle Drakenhof. I was walking away with like 2,000 plus gold a turn. It was lovely. To be fair, I did make the vampires take over most of the empire though, so whatever. The next thing to notice is there's an opposite version of that where you loot money, flat money from the settlement. So if you stick the parasitic income building in minor settlements, in the symbiotic one in major settlements, you'll maximize your money. Now be aware the discoverability is very high. So if you built both the control reduction, some parasitic building, and the income building, you'll be sitting at 90% discoverability, meaning any lord or hero that wanders by will pretty much allow them to detect your cult. So if you're going to build buildings and you want to build all 4, you really have to go symbiotic on at least 2 or 3 of the buildings to counteract the 1 or 2 parasitic buildings. The next building here is important to realize. This is your expansion building. Similar to how the Skaven undercities have a building that has a chance of expanding, the trickster cults do as well. Now, this one costs money to maintain. Reality, money is only a problem at the beginning of the game. For this faction, I had like 14,000 a turn in income, and I had 6-7 armies running around. It was ridiculous in one of my campaigns. Now, be aware that even on the symbiotic one, this does increase discoverability. The big difference between this expansion building versus the parasitic one is the percent chance. This is much higher. Chance to spread, 12 versus 6, so it's almost doubled. Now, I suspect there will be patches and changes, so these numbers are not hard and fast. However, this one does also increase discoverability much higher, as well as provide corruption. So if you really want to, it does a little destabilizing, but the big effect is it spreads your cult faster. Now, the peaceful one spreads your cult as well, but obviously at half the speed. So If you want to expand fast, the other one's your better choice. The discoverability of 60, though, really hurts, as well as the cost. I mean, you don't have the world's largest income, and you have to rely on stealing it either through your income building or symbiotic income building. So just be aware income can be a bit of an issue. The next row of buildings here are relatively unique. For the symbiotic one, it gives 100% discoverability, or plus 100 discoverability, meaning if you build this, they will find your cult immediately. If you've built the other 3, or at least these 2 symbiotic ones, you'll be reducing the visibility substantially, so you'll be at like 40. It spreads corruption. The reality is spreading corruption doesn't help you that much as this faction unless you're trying to destabilize the enemy. You don't really get any massive advantages from having your corruption in the area other than winds of magic and ammunition, which are nice but not game breaking. Now, if you fully upgrade it, you will summon an army loyal to you on completion, and then the building will be destroyed. Of course, it takes multiple turns, good chunk of money, and obviously high detection rate. But if you want to get an army, it's quite nice. Now, the flip side of this, for the parasitic one, is spreading 5 corruption in all neighboring provinces. Same level of discoverability. So make sure if you're going to use this, you use symbiotic buildings in pretty much the other 3 slots, and then build this in the 4th. Now, the cool thing is this stacks. So if I'm in this region and I have 3 cults in it, I can put it in each of the cults. The discoverability does not add together. That means every neighboring region around that will be getting plus 15 corruption. It's pretty crazy. Or provinces, technically. The reality is it causes a lot of havoc, and if you want to permanently destabilize an area, throw it in a settlement with 3 symbiotic discovery reduction buildings, and then just sit back and watch as problems are up. Now, if you build it all the way up to the top, you will summon demonic rebels that are hostile to everybody, and they will obviously destroy the building when you build it. You will not lose the cult, though, on both of these buildings. That is important to remember. Unless your cult is discovered, there's no way for the enemy to remove your cult from a settlement. At this time, I suspect that will change. So if you really want to mess with an enemy and weaken them, you could build like 3 of these in each settlement and then have them upgrade all at the same time, so there'll be 3 armies spawning in enemy territory. If you want to destroy a faction, this is a really good way of doing it. Now, this next building here is your relationship building. That's what I'm calling it. If you build it symbiotically, it will improve diplomatic relations with the settlement owner over time. This is so strong, I managed to vassalize the western province of Cathay without actually fighting them, ever. And they owned about half of Cathay. I just built this in basically every single settlement. I was getting about 3 to 4 relations with them. I think it was like plus 900 before they wanted to become a vassal and ally first. It also increases the chance of your wind of magic going up, which is nice. And most importantly, it's a huge discoverability reduction. Combining the 2 other discoverability reduction buildings in this, you basically can prevent any chance of someone discovering one of your plus 100 discoverability buildings. Now, the parasitic version of this, and there's a reason I'm jumping between them because each of them have trade-offs. This one improves your relationship with Chaos factions, basically. Wars of Chaos, Beastmen, Norska, as well as other Tzeentchian factions. It does give casualty replenishment to your armies, which is both nice but also unhelpful, because by the time you start building this everywhere, you probably should have solved your replenishment issues. It does prevent all of these buildings building the opposite building. So really the only reason you build this is if you want to be friends with the Chaos factions without having to own cults in their territory. Otherwise, the improvement of relations happens to whoever owns the province, which is cool because you can make friends with Chaos factions and non-Chaos factions that way. And then the last building only exists in the parasitic form, and it is really important to realize what it is. It's the Halls of Despoiling that upgrade into a Ravaging Host. Again, plus 100 discoverability, only exists in the parasitic form. Level 1 all it does is add corruption, which, as I mentioned, is not amazing for this faction. But it's the full one where they plunder the building, you get tons of money, and you damage the building based off the settlement level. If you do this to like a maxed out Drakenhof, you're looking at like 20 or 30k golds coming in. It's ridiculous. The reason this is important is some of your schemes require this. So let's talk about schemes. Obviously, I completed one when I took Norden. Schemes are how you win the game in both Realm of Chaos and Immortal Empires. You have to complete grand schemes and then complete the ultimate scheme. In this case, you also have to, if you want domination, you have to destroy, which is difficult for this faction. So this is not a domination world conquest faction, really. Now, what happens is, and this is different between Immortal Empires and Realm of Chaos, slightly. Most of the stuff is pretty generic between regions. So you will have a series of schemes marked by the number of dots. Some have more. Cathay here has 7, as does Darklands and Mountain of Morn, whereas Chaos Waste has 5. In order to unlock the grand scheme for the area, which is this square one, you have to complete minor schemes. We've already completed one, which this applies in basically every region. Infiltrate a settlement in the theater, which is this region shown on the map, with a cult. Pretty standard. The other standard one is almost always destroy a faction. In this case, it's destroy the Fecundites, which is obviously the Warriors of Chaos, Nurgle faction. Now, in other regions, if we go to Norska and Kislev, let's see where it is. They don't actually have a destroy one, but Grand Cathay does, destroy the Jade Court. So just be aware there are slight variations, but there's almost always a destroy one. The other one that there almost always is a raise corruption, Zeech corruption, to 75 in a region and maintain it. The reason this one is important is a lot of times it gives you a Trickster Rift, or something equivalent to that level. It can also give you a Trickster Cultist. This one gives a Trickster Cultist, as a matter of fact. But there's almost always one of those, raise corruption in a region to 75. It's extremely easy to do, so I'm actually going to take a slight detour here and explain how to do it. You use the Changing of the Ways mechanic, which we'll go more into, and you click on Spread Corruption, click on your faction, pay the Grimoire cost, wait 3-4 turns, and you've almost guaranteed you're going to get it. It's like plus 25 corruption a turn. It's ridiculous. Anyhow, those are the standard schemes. Now there is another scheme here that's pretty normal, and that is win land battles. This does not count siege battles. So taking settlements does not count. You have to fight an army on the map. The only exception I have found so far is ogre camps count as land battles, which actually means getting the 12 battles or 15 battles against ogres the easiest fight battles. Your best bet I found is to set up a cult, set up an ambush right outside of the area, and attempt to ambush armies moving in and out of the settlement, rather than trying to hunt down their armies. Because if you're invisible, the AIs will not come to you. They will go about their business normally. And chasing AIs around the map is quite difficult, I found. This next one here is win 12 battles. So sometimes there's a 15, sometimes there's a 12. This is beat the dwarves. Now, if we look here, this is why I wanted to mention the Ravaging Host cult building. You either have to sack Altdorf or construct a Ravaging Host building there. Basically, you have to be aggressive against them, taking their capital, which can be very hard to do, or you sneak in sympathetically, build your sympathetic buildings, and then sneakily build the Ravaging Host building from the parasitic tree, and you can complete the mission without having to take the settlement. It's nice. You can pretty much go most of the game without fighting battles. I think the very hard campaign I won as these guys, because I've been playing this a lot since release, I fought 41 battles in 140 something turns. So as you can imagine, very few battles. Only one of them was initiated against me. All the other ones I started. So you can lurk pretty well. Once you've done that, you can trigger the Grand Scheme, where you will gain a Trickster's Reward. Some other missions will give you Trickster's Rewards as well. They stack effects. But winning this battle will change the ultimate scheme, which is the end game battle for this faction. In this case, it will prevent the Empire from showing up. Also, it will cause the Empire to descend into civil war. This effect changes between areas. If we go to Grand Cathay and we look at this, again, they will be unable to reinforce. But in their case, the Warband will breach the Grand Bastion, sending rebels to swarm the area, as well as give you abundant magics instead. Now, obviously, if we look at Kislev, Norska, in this case, is weird. Norska will invade Grand Cathay rather than actually going after Kislev. Mountains of Land in Morn, Greenskins will revolt. They will join you and your allies, and then will cause havoc with them. Chaos Waste, something similar. In this case, Zeech, other Zeech factions will unleash waves of rebels against the other Chaos factions. So just be aware that is what the Grand one does, and you'll usually get a loot and you'll get a Trickster Rift. It's not the world's hardest battle. I mean, it's like a quest battle. I found them a little easier than quest battles myself, even on hard difficulties. But they are not something you want to rush to do early on. You want to wait till you've got a good top unit, an army comprised of top-of-the-line units before you fight these battles, because it's one army versus whatever is there. Now, the ultimate scheme, and we'll look at this here. This is the ultimate scheme battle. You have allies, which are gray, because we have not gotten them from completing minor schemes, and enemies whose text is bright white, meaning they would reinforce. So this will tell you the units coming in, and as you can see, they're very strong units. If you look at the cult units, your reinforcements, you'll see that they're significantly smaller. They're good units, but they're not going to be able to win the battles for you. So again, ultimate scheme, you want to delay till you've got really good units. It wasn't that hard. I only completed 3 minor schemes in one campaign and did it easily. When I completed all 5 major schemes here in Realm of Chaos, the final battle was a piece of cake. It was easy, even on very hard mode. So just be aware of that. Now, that is basically it for the scheme mechanic. There are a couple more mechanics we need to talk about for the Changeling, though. The first one is the access to the Changing of the Ways, which if you've played the Zeech factions before, you will notice there is a change. This came with the Shadows of War 4.0 update. Applies to all the Zeech factions. Now, Changing of the Ways uses grimoires to have various effects. You have to research all of them but spread corruption. Now, that appears on your tech tree up here, Changing of the Ways. Takes grimoires to research. As I said, right now, grimoires are so plentiful. I think I had 23,000 excess at the end of one of my campaigns. It was pretty absurd how many I had. But you have stuff like Spread Corruption, Open the Gates, making it much easier for you to take capital settlements. Reveal Shroud if you want to see all a faction's territory. You're probably never going to need this one, because as soon as you take a province and establish a cult in a region, you will be able to see the entire region. Pretty useless for you. Break Alliances is good if you want to weaken faction or declare war on one without triggering others. Track Army, really you shouldn't need this because you have full vision, similar to Reveal Shroud. Force Peace is nice. Unfortunately, and this is something that I am a little bit frustrated with, is it doesn't seem possible for you to make peace a faction with you. I don't know if it's a bug or what, but right now you cannot force someone to make peace with you, but you can stop them from fighting other factions. Oops, there we go. Forced Rebellion is nice. It works decently on minor settlements. It's pretty bad at taking major settlements, but it does have a special purpose in the Changeling's RoC bag of tricks. If you do a Forced Rebellion and then stick your army nearby an ambush, sometimes you can lure out the enemy army from the city for you to ambush to help you get those land battles in the region. You can also attack the rebels to get a land battle in the region out. Since you have to get like 12, 15, that's a lot of battles. It's very, actually, quite difficult to accomplish. You think it's easy. It's not, because the enemies don't come to you. Transfer Settlement. Self-explanatory. Pick the faction, pick the settlement you want to change it, faction you want to give it to, select the settlement, and it will be transferred. Works on everything except for capital settlements. So yes, unfortunately, you cannot give Altdorf to the Lizardmen out of the blue, but you can give all the provinces around Altdorf, for example. Halt Army stops them from moving. Very useful for you if you're chasing an army and you want to catch them for a land battle count. Force War doesn't work on allies, but it works against settlement factions that are not allied. Particularly nice at weakening like Cathay or the Empire, or destroying alliances and destabilizing whole regions. So then you can kind of sneak in, attack, take a settlement, establish a cult, move to another one, and keep going. Basically, your job is to kind of undermine the world. And the last, and probably the least mechanic in the game for the Changeling, that's important, is the Changeling is a formless horror. And if you look at its tree here, its only trait is can shapeshift into battle into other legendary lords and heroes. So yes, if you click on this, you will see every single legendary lord and hero in the game. And you can, in fact, shapeshift into them when you either beat them in battle, ally them, or get them randomly unlocked for schemes. Now, the question is, which of these should you transform into? Because you can only set one to transfer into battle. Depends what you're going for, but in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, Grimgor Ironhide, if you can transform into him, is particularly strong. He has a massive amount of armor. I particularly like transforming into him because the Changeling sucks in melee combat because they're a spellcaster. Grimgor is one of the strongest fighters. There's other ones you can do. Skarbrand in particular is fun. Valkia, less in my opinion. Skarbrand can really rampage. Nikari is particularly good. Basically, out of them, the Chaos leaders tend to be very good. Exceptions being ones with super high melee attack. So if you're looking up here, you'll see who has high melee attack. Special mention to people like Grombrindle of the Dwarves, who's an absolute monster. Can't get him in this game mode, which is why I can't show him. But if you want to, you can have them transform into Gotrek, which is kind of neat. This expands based off the factions in the game. You can have quite a few armies. Quite a few forms. The stat levels up. And this is getting a little bit into the tree of the Changeling. But you have the ability to upgrade. For example, this one makes you stronger than the person you've transformed into. This one gives you better range. So if you wanted to do like a Wood Elf Archer or something, or the Hunts Marshal, very good. Decrease on spells. The important part is, let's see, where was it? Physical resistance while transformed. Really, this supports the idea you should be transforming into a melee one. This one, faster speed, more armor. Stick on someone like Grimgor or something, or Skarbrand, and suddenly their armor is ridiculous, and they're very strong. It's great. And finally, form 1,000 Faces. You can use the assumed form spell. At this point, you could consider transforming into a spellcaster. It's quite nice. I still preferred melee combat. Lord, just because the Changeling, the weakness of Tzeentch factions is melee combat, so having a Lord that can fight really well in melee combat is very nice. Okay, let's talk about the units. These are the standard Tzeentch units. Obviously, Shadows of Change added more, so I'm not going to go super into depth on the generic ones, but I'm going to talk about some of the new stuff. So you have a new mid-tier infantry unit here, Zangors, tier 2 out of now tier 5, so it's decent but not great. All of each units have barriers, so that means their hit points are a little bit larger than you'd imagine. So that's hit points 4,300, a barrier of 500. If you're outside of combat, the barrier will slowly build up. It allows a unit to fight, rest for a minute, and then fight again. It's basically, think of it as a healing if you're not in combat after you've taken damage. Out of these, you have your standard, really relatively weak Marauder units. You have, however, the blue horrors and the pink horrors, which matter because the horrors have range attacks. Tzeentch is a ranged faction, really the only ranged chaos faction in the game, and the Changeling has it as well. These pink horrors are very strong. They do significant damage at range. They kind of, if you stack them together, you have spells and other stuff that can make enemies vulnerable to fire, upon which these fire and magic damage they do does significantly more. It's a good range. Because of the barrier, they are a lot tankier than you'd imagine at range. Your infantry really sucks, though. Even your Chaos Warriors and your Forsaken are particularly bad. Exceptions being your Chosen are pretty good as well, and if you get into Regiments of Renown, you've got even better ones. However, Tzeentch actually has really good cavalry, including flying cavalry. So definitely bring that to the battles. Having one or two of these, being able to take out dwarven helicopter units or gyrocopter units, anyone's flying dragons or lords, as well as be able to fly over and take out artillery is great. The downside is you really don't have any unit capable of holding a front line. Some of your late stuff, your Chosens, can do a decent job, but they won't win the battle for you. Now, in terms of your monsters, you have a large roster of them. They all have effects, so you want to read up on which they do, like the cockatrice, or however you say it, can weaken enemies in an area, attack and speed. Very nice for helping you hold the line. All your units still have barriers. You have these Lords of Change, which are important to recognize because they have bound spells, meaning it does not cost Winds of Magic to cast. You can upgrade that through your technology. I'll go over that when I go over tech. You should probably have at least one of these in every late game army for just the free spell casting. You also have access to these Mutalith Vortex Beasts, which are very strong. They do damage in an area just being in combat, and they do have a spell or ability they can activate fully upgraded. This one in particular has a really strong one, Maelstrom of Change. These are going to be your few melee damage dealers capable of killing anything. You have spawns and stuff. You have a Chaos War Shrine. The important thing here is that it provides leadership as well as power recharge as well. And it gets stronger with any nearby enemy. In fact, this one here, this flying unit, it might not be this one. There's one of their flying units gets stronger the more spells cast near it. I don't remember offhand. We've talked about the missile one. The Exalted Pink Horrors are significantly better than the Pink Horrors, which are significantly better than the Blue Horrors. However, all your missile units should be replaced at late game with your Flamers. Flamers are extraordinarily powerful missile monsters. Downside is they're terrible in melee combat compared to Pink Horrors, which are decent. I would say on the weaker side of decent, but they don't die instantly in melee combat. Flamers do. Flamers have longer range. If you can protect a Flamer, it's great. Then you have your Soul Grinders, which you should always bring one or two to your late game armies. Very strong, very powerful, single entities that can hold their own in melee combat. In terms of Missile Cab, you got your Marauders and you've got your Burning Chariots. Burning Chariots are worth bringing. The downside is they're extraordinarily weak to range attacks. So if you're fighting an enemy with range abilities, you probably don't want to bring these to the combat. In terms of Lords, you have a unique legendary hero. You can unlock the Blue Scribes. Spellcaster buffs your other spells. Cultists of Tzeentch, you have Fire and Tzeentch. So pick which one you want. You have Metal. You have Iridescent Horrors of Metal and Tzeentch as well. And you could unlock this legendary hero as well if you've registered with their accounts and stuff. I'm not going to go into that here. Overall, don't expect for your front lines to hold for long at all. Their job there is to keep the enemy off your spellcasters. So skirmish mode is very useful. Try to bring Pink Horrors when you can unlock them, backed up by Flamers. Have a few melee units that can hold the front line and distract the enemy, and then rely on spells and killing all the enemy before they close with you. Biggest weakness for this faction? Enemies with superior range, like Wood Elves, High Elves, any other faction with great range, or Cav units. You don't have any really super effective way of killing Cav. Yes, some of your elite stuff are Halabards and stuff, so they can hold out, but your ranged units tend to be overrun and killed very quickly. So beware of cavalry and superior range. Surprisingly, melee is not a problem because you can usually kill them before they close with you. Spellcasters are annoying. Thankfully, you have barriers which will negate a significant chunk of spellcast damage. Okay, let's talk about technology now. So the tech tree for the Changeling is different than the other Tzeentch faction, so it's worth mentioning. You start off in the middle. Way of the Trickster gives you all the cult supplies and grimoires you pretty much need, as well as a huge boost to casualty replenishment. I mentioned earlier the Changeling suffers from casualty replenishment. That holds true. Because you don't actually own any lands, you can't build any replenishment buildings other than one cult building, which really, if you built that building, you shouldn't be fighting in that region anyway. You pretty much want to establish a cult, and unless you're trying to get kills from the faction that owns the settlement, you just want to move on. There's no reason to hang around in a region once you've got a cult. Most of your actions take place in regions you've long left. You're just upgrading buildings and spreading cults. Now, you've got 6 different ways to go. Changing of the Ways unlocks your additional Changing of the Ways, which we already mentioned what they do. Below here, you've got Trickster Cultists, which you get from completion of schemes. Basically, it allows you to summon an agent to establish a cult in an entirely different area of the world. This is expanded on in Immortal Empires, but for example here, if you get a Trickster Cultist and you expend it, you can accrue them up here. You can summon this in the Empire. You can summon this in Norska Kislev. It will create a cult and die, but from there you can put the cult spreading building on and start spreading your tendrils around the world. Once you get a Trickster Cultist, usually we're sending it to a region you're not already in, just so that you can start spreading. You're playing a game with the whole world. It's slightly difficult for some people to wrap their heads around, I'm sure. You want to be expanding in like 3 or 4 different spots at the same time because it takes you a long time to spread and get super powerful. Think of it almost like you're almost like a cancer slowly spreading throughout the body before it actually causes problems. And it may never cause problems, but just think of it that way. Over here is your Trickster Rifts. You might be wondering, well, if I'm supposed to do multiple areas, how to bring my army? You have rifts. The rifts have set locations. You'll see them on the map as this white stuff. You'll get Trickster Rifts from either completing specific schemes, like for example, spreading corruption in Castle Drakenhof. You'll get a rift as well as a point to open another rift. The Drakenhof one is the easiest to complete because you start in the Empire regions in both games. Once you do that, you can spread elsewhere. So if we want to go from Sylvania all the way over to Cathay, or if in Immortal Empires you want to jump to Lustria or something, you can do that. Sending your army through the rift takes a turn. It goes in, comes out the next turn. You can send agents through, although really you don't really want many agents running around other than your Trickster Cultists, and they should establish rifts and die pretty quickly. Now, we've covered that. Up here is your various Winds of Magic stuff. This will make your spellcasting stronger. I recommend you get Thematic Folk Locus fairly early on. Just additional Winds of Magic reserve is really strong on a spellcasting faction. You have base miscast as well as resistant on characters. Sadly, it's not on units. If it was, you'd be immune to magic basically, but it's a nice bonus. Cooldown on spells, very nice again for a spellcasting faction. Storm of Fire, this army ability you can use in battle. The reality is you want to get it, but it's not a huge priority. Glean Magic, on the other hand, is fairly useful. First off, it's a very strange technology, and it bears mentioning. It adds spell resistance to your axe infantry there that I mentioned is kind of like a midline, not so strong unit. It gets stronger as spells are cast around it, and now it has magic resistance. So yes, it still sucks in melee combat, but it can actually do some damage now. Prior to this, though, it's basically just a shield. It does add spell to Lord of Change, as well as give more spell cast to your Lord of Change units. These were the ones I was talking about that have bound abilities that cast outside of Winds of Magic. Bolt of Change is another damaging ability, shoots down. Half decent at killing off artillery. With like 2 strikes, you can kill most artillery. But the big use is it sunders armor, so toss it on the enemy as they hit your front line, and your units will actually be slightly more effective in melee. Infernal Gateway, another bound spell for Lord of Change. Same thing for Treason, as well as Firestorm. This is all improving Lords of Change. If you don't have any Lords of Change, pretty much don't research past maybe the Locust and Fire of Change. There's really no reason to go further into this tree. Plus, it's expensive in terms of grimoires, which as well, you will have an excess of them, but you probably won't have it super early game. Over here, though, if you do Warhorse in Waiting, which I recommend is probably your second tech, adds a global recruitment as well as a local recruitment. Since you're going to be doing a lot of global recruitment if you want to expand, because you can recruit lords from any settlement you have a cult in, but you may not build military buildings in that area. And sending an army from like a production region where you built up the military line and a cult to a region is by and large a waste of time. You're better off recruiting there and using global recruitment. It's probably faster. After that, you get access to army boons, some of which are better than others. You have to do Architect's Chosen first, which is so. Endless Mutation, though, is really good. Casualty replenishment as well as global recruitment. The Changeling has replenishment issues. This helps. You'll be getting plus 15 here. It's really nice. Further above it, Champions of Change, plus 50 experience gain. You need to get this early. The reason is, unless you're playing a militaristic Changeling, as in you're fighting literally everybody all the time as much as you can, you are going to be short on XP on your lords, because you won't get the battle XP. You'll only be getting the passive XP. 50% gain on it will help significantly. Outside of that, you have access to Scatter Loci, another casualty replenishment, local recruitment as well. Between these two and this one, plus 20% replenishment, actually will start to make it so you can win a battle and keep moving rather than having to sit around healing for a couple turns. Teleport is worth snagging pretty early on because it means it doesn't cost any grimoires for you to use the teleporting stance of the Zeech factions, which is basically like the Underway, except you can't get intercepted. And you will take attrition, not the turn you teleport, but the next turn you'll be out of the teleport stance, so just be aware of that. Down here, Inscrutable Demagoguery. Cultist, if you're recruiting a lot of heroes as well as spellcasters and stuff, these will help you level them up. The reality is I found I didn't need them because I wasn't losing heroes. Now, in terms of unit boons, you have to do Mastery of Scheming. It might be worth snagging Warhost and then jumping back, because 100 experience gain on armies that you're probably not going to lose your army. It's quite easy to play till the end game with your starting army and units, although you probably want to replace them at some point. Having them be higher level is really nice. In terms of unit boons, again, some are better than others. You have to kind of customize it to what you're using. Piercing Screams is great. We're boosting a couple of your flying units. Not going to change too much, but the text below it are. Greater Locus of Focus will add Arcane Mirth to your horrors. Basically, it will allow your power to recharge faster so you can cast the same amount of spells. It doesn't increase your regen of Winds of Magic, but it'll allow you to cast them faster, which is quite nice. As well as Exalted Locus of Conjuration. This will boost your weapon strength and ammunition of most of your early to mid-game range units, your horrors. It's a huge boost. 25% is great. They will be doing significantly more damage. Once you shift to Flamers, you want to snag plus 9 missile strength. Not game-breaking, but they do a lot of missile strength, so it's like plus, I think, like 50 or 60 damage a shot. It's quite nice. Locus of Transmogrification increases the recruitment rank for your low-level range units. If you're going to be using a lot of them, this might be worth snagging early to mid-game. The reality is I pretty much skipped blue horrors, and to some degree I skipped the basic pink horrors and just went to Exalted Pink. And then because of Mastery of Scheming, they leveled up quickly anyway. Gift of Mutation, this will give some of your low-level melee units armor. It's not great, but if you're going to use them at all, it's worth snagging. Not going to even try to read all these ones. This boosts your stronger infantry and cavalry, gives them more armor, helps significantly to keep them alive. In some ways, you might want to research this before you upgrade some of the range stuff, just because having a front line that doesn't die in 5 seconds is really nice. And finally, below here, you've got spell resistance on some of your melee and monster units, and disc taming if you recruit Doom Knights, which are your flying Cav Knights, which are actually really good. Plus 2 recruitment rank is quite nice. And that's the technology for the factions. I recommend Way of Trickster, Warhost in Waiting, Master of Scheming, probably hit into army boons, get your replenishment, and then if you want, go over here to strengthen your units. Once you get a good reserve of grimoires, you can start researching these. The best ones I found in particular, by the way, you have to research one of this tech before you can reach this line, before you can research this line, same here. Transfer Settlement is really good. Force Rebellion is pretty nice as well as Open Gates if you're struggling to take capital settlements. Finally, Break Alliance is really nice. Halt Army will help you get those 12 kills. Forced War I didn't find particularly strong, but I didn't do like a super late game Immortal Empires because you can win pretty quickly as this faction once you know what you're doing. Okay, so we went over this already, but time to talk about the economy for the Changeling. The economy is probably the worst part for this faction. You have enough cult supplies and you have enough grimoires. You'll probably have enough of these with no trouble. Your money, on the other hand, is an issue. So you have 2 income buildings outside of battle loot. You have the symbiotic one, which gains income based off the settlement. Stick this in your capital settlements of large factions that are going to survive. The vampires might be one. It's really good in the Kislev major settlements, decently well in some of the high elves ones. Skaven can be used. Since you will never lose a cult, it's worth throwing these down pretty much everywhere. The only difference is if a minor settlement is taken by like a chaos faction or something, they basically drop the income to 0. And if you don't have income in the settlement being gained by the owner, you don't get income yourself. So keep an eye on your settlements. You may have to change these over time. The other option is just flat income. So stick these in minor settlements, especially settlements that will be traded back and forth. The big ones I'm thinking about are like the areas around the major settlements of Kislev, like the minor ones, some of the Bretonnian ones, the Greenskin Badlands area, areas where the front will shift back and forth. Factions will come in, take over, and then leave. Just because you don't want the shifting income. This is good income. 450 is great. It does weaken the people who own it, so they will more likely collapse. But the discoverability hurts, whereas this one reduces discoverability and is a much safer option. Find major settlements, stick them in that. Minor settlements that are making no money, and early game. You want to throw this down a lot early game. The low level ones will give you significantly more money. Once you start getting like 4,000 or 5,000 gold a turn, you'll start to snowball really fast. Because if you want to throw down expansion buildings pretty much everywhere you can, you want every settlement to have a cult in it by the end, and you don't want any of them detected. And then you throw down an income building. Make sure that you do throw down some of these grimoires, public order, either helping or hindering buildings. You should probably throw this down in every single settlement, either to help them or to destabilize them. That's how you have no grimoire and other stuff problems. That's basically your economy. Throw these down everywhere. Throw these down, choose symbiotic or anti-symbiotic based off how much money the settlement's making. And outside of that, that's basically the only way you make money. You can do loots here, but the reality is the time it takes to do this huge loot isn't worth it unless it's on a super major settlement like Castle Drakenhof, for example. So let's talk about the 2 starts for this faction. So right now we're in Realm of Chaos, and as you can see, we started next to Norden. We could easily take it and establish a cult. You start with a cult in Dieterschaffen up here. You are located at the northern part of the Empire. You have Kislev to your east. You have the Empire to your west and south, and to the north is Norska. You have multiple options to expand. The first you need to determine is where you're going to go for your first schemes. I recommend trying to complete the scheme in the Empire first, because it will give you another rift so you don't have to walk for turns, and it's not that hard to complete at least 3 of these. The first one you'll complete in every theater instantly. Taking Altdorf might take you time if you can loot it and sack it by invading. Important to note, though, if you have a cult in a settlement, you can't sack it. You can only raise it. So don't get a cult in Altdorf and then try and take the settlement. If you have a cult in Altdorf, you really need to build Ravaging Host. The cool part is that can take like 40 turns to do. There's no rush to complete schemes. There's no penalty for not doing them like 1, 2, 3, 4 in a row, other than you have to win the battles. You do get regimented around Steam Tank, which is nice. So I recommend start here. Trying to get over to Drakenhof, throw down that corruption one is pretty easy. You have multiple options. Spend a few turns up here capturing some minor settlements, getting your income going. Middenheim is a particularly nice area to expand into. If you wish to destroy the Fecundites, you've got to start moving over there quickly. They're very powerful and are going to be hard to punch through and do damage to. Kislev at the beginning is probably going to be too hard for you to invade. If you can get an early cult in Erengrad, though, go for it. Otherwise, wait till you can infiltrate that either with a cultist or a passive spread. The first, I'd say 40 to 50 turns, don't worry about accomplishing the schemes too much. Worry more about spreading cults and starting your economy rolling. You want to get as much income coming in. Cult supplies and grimoires will follow suit. You want to find a region that has a couple settlements. The ideal ones are up here. The Wasteland in particular is great. If you build this into a recruiting settlement region, so build all your recruitment buildings to high level, make sure they're not going to get detected. Then once you open a rift here, if you spend it on the Empire, you can then recruit an army, recruit it by local recruitment, the Lord, then local recruitment, and then send it through the rift, which will save you some turns. If you don't do that, you're going to have to use global recruitment, in which case you can pick anywhere and build the buildings. Now, an important thing I figured out is the presence of the ogres down here. If you don't do anything, the ogres are going to start overrunning this whole area. The Empire will fall. That's not a problem. If they take Altdorf, it's really easy to then sack Altdorf and complete that scheme. However, the ogre camps count as land battles, and the ogres are particularly aggressive. So it's quite possible to go over there and get like 10, 12 battles with the ogres. The reason I mention that, not because you're going to be completing battles in the Empire area, for some reason this doesn't count as the Empire area, this does though, is if later on you go to the Darklands, Mountains of Morin, there is win 12 battles against the Ogre Kingdoms, and you can get a start on it without having to walk all the way to the Ogre region. Once you do that, you can expand through here. Be aware that some of these areas, regions are huge. Know which region you're in, because it's quite possible that you jump between one region and the next that doesn't have a cult, and all of a sudden your army's vulnerable and gets attacked. So move carefully, move slowly. Try not to attack settlements that have defending armies. There's really no point to it. You want to get over to Drakenhof, which is over here. You don't need to be in the Drakenhof province itself, just in the region. So either here, just sit on the edge, tap your spread corruption building, and you'll very quickly not only complete it, you'll unlock the rift here and then can jump elsewhere in the world. From there, it's your choice where you want to go. If you want to fight chaos, which is, I think, a little bit harder, you can head up to the Chaos Waste. You have a portal here and here, I think. If you want to go over, the Chaos Dwarves are probably the hardest area to complete violently. You can do it passively because they like you, but it might be worth getting up to Cathay early on. Now, in Cathay itself, there is Destroy the Jade Court. If you get Strike quickly and early, you can do it. The downside is if you don't get here early, Clan Eshin will die, which will lock this scheme off. There's also a couple other schemes you can lose, like fight the Knights of Caledor. If they die, you would have to spawn new rebels and hope to get them back. So just be aware, some you can't complete, but Cathay is particularly nice because you can infiltrate it. There's a lot of rich settlements, and you can destabilize it really easily because Cathay has public order problems. And if you do, you'll flood the whole area and you won't have to worry about Cathay anyhow. But there's really no reason to help the Chaos factions to win the game. That's something, it's very strange. You think because you're Chaos you want to help them. No. Ideally you want kind of a balance with no side getting particularly strong in case you need to rush in and fight a couple battles against them to complete schemes. Go for your schemes, let the rest of the world burn. That's basically the strategy here. Take settlements, establish cults, expand out. It's a very easy campaign in terms of how it's played. You can roleplay, be super aggressive and violent and fight wars with everybody, or you can be nice and peaceful and spread your cult that way. I do want to mention, though, this ability to spread diplomatic relations is super strong. Most factions hate you. If they're a non-chaos faction, they're going to despise you. Throwing one of these down will help. If you fill all their lands with this, they will eventually make peace with you, even though you've just ravaged and pillaged most of your lands. Same thing with your allies. If you throw this down everywhere in your allies' land, build up a huge reputation, then attack them, they'll make peace with you, even though you just attacked them. You can really mess with factions. It's fun. I imagine there will be nerfs coming to this because it feels a little too strong, but it's a lot of fun. And that's it. that's basically the whole faction. I've explained most of the game concepts. There's nothing much else to learn here. You just have to pick, are you going to be aggressive, and where in the world are you going to destabilize? I do not think you can lose as this faction. The only way you lose is in multiplayer if someone else wins, because any of your cults will allow you to recruit a lord. And when you recruit the lord, they will have this invisibility icon, so they won't be attacked. Just make sure you move a little bit away from the city in the long run, because they can get caught in your zone of control. So just move down here. You're safe for the whole game. Unless somebody really went on a campaign to clear all your cults out, you're pretty much safe. If you're playing against the Changeling, you have to build like the watch building that detects Skaven cities to counteract you. So if you see those being built everywhere, just you have to switch to Symbiotic. Even with tons of detection, if you go Symbiotic, they cannot find you. Symbiotic is really strong, although weaker than aggressive, than the ones that parasitic that boosts detection. It's just the way it is. Anyway, go have fun. They have fun being the Changeling, invade the Empires, Karl Franz, invade the Greenskins as Grimgor. It's quite amusing. It's not a huge game mechanic, though. Just remember, if you want to change, you do have to make the change here, assume for battle. It's quite fun. In terms of skills, they're pretty self-explanatory. Strong spellcaster, go for replenishment first. Strengthen your transformation, strengthen your spellcasting. Take this top line when you get it. It's nothing amazing, but it's nice boosts. I imagine this would be really good to play in multiplayer if you're playing with a friend to either hinder them or help them. Outside of that, though, it's a pretty simple solo player campaign. I may go straight to Legendary on my next campaign with these guys because it's that easy. Anyway, have fun. Hope you enjoy it. Any tips and tricks you've got of your own, please put them below. Like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. And I'll see you guys in another Let's Play or Guide video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.